In this lesson, we're going to start adding color to the areas around the house. So basically, we're going to be adding detail or depth to the landscaping that there is. So the elements that we would like to focus on are, first of all, the ground that is around the building. We have the driveway, we have the trees, we have this very steep slope that is going down towards the ocean, and then right at the bottom, this contour here, we are going to see a small corner of the sea itself. So those are the things that we would like to show. Now, looking at the contours, I would like to start with the bare ground as the first element to work with. So what I'm going to do here is that I would like to, first of all, remove some of these contours that are showing through these shades of color that we have on top of the swimming pool and the deck area. So the way that we're going to do that is by adding a mask to that CAD layer with those contours. So let's go ahead and select an area that we're going to add to that mask. We're going to do that by control clicking the icon of the layer that is the water in this case, and then to add to that selection so that we basically include all of this, we need to control shift click the icon for the terrace. Now you'll have a look that those selections don't include the furniture, they just include the shading and the area around that furniture. So we need to now manually go in and just using shift or holding down shift, just add to that selection so that you include all of the pieces of furniture. So then the result is a continuous long selection, and we can now find the layer with the CAD contours, which is this one here. We can just check that by turning it on and off, and we can go and click the icon at the bottom in the middle, which is going to add a mask. So you'll see here the mask has been created, but the colors are inverted. So click on the mask itself and then invert that mask by using the Control I shortcut on your keyboard, and you'll see already that those contours have been erased. Now there are a couple of other keyboard shortcuts that are quite relevant to this mask. One of them is to shift click it, which turns it on and off. So you can see that red cross basically shows you what the image looks like without the mask, so that if you want to delete it, you can see what it would look like once it's deleted. And then you can also alt click, and the alt click allows you to see an extracted version of that mask itself, which means that you can come in with your selection, your lasso tool or anything like that. You can come in with a paintbrush, a gradient. You can basically work in black and white, creating this mask at this level when it's extracted. Then when you're done editing it, you can simply alt-click that icon and you'll go back to your default drawing. So those are quite interesting ways that you can work with certain layers, for example the CAD, without actually going and deleting the layers itself, because you may at one point want to do a revision and you don't necessarily want to redo all of that work by deleting certain portions of your layers. So that's a nice tip to keep in mind, to always use masks where you can. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some color to the surrounding. Now I had been doing tests on the side, and the results that come out of doing a continuous color tone around all of the grassy areas do look quite negative on the presentation. Now if you remember back to the time when we did the PowerPoint presentation at the beginning of this course, we showed a couple of examples and we discussed how it doesn't look good when you have color on the inside and the outside, and everything just becomes this very dense patchwork. In other words, we start to lose that precious negative space that we have at the moment. Remember that what you want to do in a presentation is you want to focus the eye on what the main objective or object is in your presentation, and you don't want to distract anybody's view or basically dilute the visibility of those objects on your presentation panel. So right now what the white is giving us is that it's really highlighting these colored tones, and it's telling us this is where the house is. And for example, you can see that the color is slightly lighter here. For the living area it's slightly darker, which makes it look as though we're stepping down onto a terrace, and then we have a pool color which is a different color completely. So all these things are very visually revealing, and going and destroying that with a green grass surrounding the house is just not going to do any justice. So anyway, let's go ahead and work on something different. I'm rather going to reveal the three-dimensionality of the site by adding a gradient, a very, very gentle one, to the sloped area of this site itself. So what I need to do that is to first of all create a new layer, and then to define the area that I'm going to be adding that gradient to. So I'm just coming in with my polygonal or polygon lasso, and I'm just very roughly, I don't really have to be too precise with this, and I'm just selecting the final contour that is at the edge of this precipice. And I can come around the bottom, and I can just double click to finish off that selection. So now that I have that in place, I can add a gradient. So I'm going to use the gradient that I have here. It's a light beige color that goes across to white, and I'm just going to drag that. So I've chosen the linear gradient, and I'm going to drag that diagonally from the bottom, roughly coming up towards the house. And that's going to give me this dimensionality to this plan, showing that we have the top white surface that is then disappearing into the darker beige surface. So I'm going to add a little bit more opacity to it. We don't need to have such drastic colors. And the last thing I can do here to the layer for the ground is I can just add a very light blue texture to the blue corner here at the bottom. So this I can do as a separate layer. I can also delete the layer or delete the corner by hitting backspace on my keyboard. And I'm rather going to leave it in. I'm rather going to overlay. And I'm going to now choose the paint bucket. I'm going to hold it down Alt so that it gives me the eyedropper tool. I'm going to eyedropper the blue from the swimming pool, and I'm just going to use that color here. Now you can come in and you can either darken it, lighten it. You can do things such as burn the edge of that water, and you can just give it a little bit more tonality if you want to. So that can then be edited individually so that you get a nice balance. You don't want to make it too dark so that it doesn't distract from the perspective, or at least from the composition that you have going here. So you can just basically use the opacity, use the hue and saturation so that you get a very nice balanced effect. So the last thing that I'm going to do here, knowing that I'm going to keep all of these surfaces white, is I'm going to add trees to the circles that we have indicated here in CAD. So let's go ahead and create a new group, and this group will be called trees. And then this new layer here, I'm just going to drag into that group, and this is going to be my first tree. So you can start by zooming into one of those trees. You can then choose the selection, the elliptical marquee, so normal circle, and then holding down Shift, just drag out a circle roughly the size of the tree itself. Then you can just add the green color using the paint bucket. And you can also have a look later after you create the tree where the green is actually the best color. Now, one thing I'd like to do is on that tree layer, I'm going to choose a multiply value so that it basically shows and reveals all of that CAD information that there is below. So once you have that tree in place, you want to start modifying that layer before you copy it around to the other trees to make it look a little bit more pleasing, since right now it obviously is too dense and too dark. So the first thing you can do is you can open up your hue and saturation, so Control U is your keyboard shortcut for that, and just increase the lightness, increase the saturation if you would like to add more green, and then just go through your tones and see what looks best on your presentation. I'm going to use a very, very light color. And then a couple of things that you can do to this. Since you don't want to be too definitive with that edge, you can give it a little bit of a blur. So we can look at Gaussian blur, we can just blur it very slightly. And we can also double click on it to give us a drop shadow, which we can do in a very, very subtle way as well. So we can add some distance to that. Make it look like the tree is floating slightly off the page so that we get that impression of height. So once that is done, you can then go and copy it. So the way to copy it is to hold down Control and Alt on your keyboard. You get this little double icon, the double triangle, and then just drag those copies around. And remember as well, if you do these overlays, then have the bigger tree, which would be the taller one, be above the stack compared to the smaller ones that will be below it. So that can be changed just by dragging the layers up and down within your stack. So I'm quickly going to pause the video here and then finish these trees, and then we'll have a look at that final result in a second. So here is the result of all those trees now being copied with all of those circles. And even you'll have a look, these areas that are actually polygons that have corners, I've just used that same blurred circle to copy over that. So you don't have to be too accurate or try to painstakingly trace the edges of all your trees. Just use something quite rough, be quite gentle with the opacity so that you get some transparency through the object, and just basically be quite abstract with the way that you actually apply and render your trees. Those are generally going to get you the best results, not really distracting from your plan itself. The last thing that I'd like to do to this plan just before I take it and add a title block in the next lesson is I would like to add a layer which tends to blur the edges away into the white page. So we can do that by adding a plain white color using a quite large paintbrush with a low opacity, and you can then just start to add white around the outside. And this is something that will also help to bring out your building in the middle of the page a lot more, since a lot of these trees are still quite dark and we tend to get quite an abrupt ending to the page if you just leave it to continue. So what this does is it creates that very gentle gradient so that your entire plan fades away a little bit. So here I've done it a little bit too much, so you can go into your layer itself and you can now go and reduce the opacity slightly. So you can see what it looks like with and without. So with it on, what it does is that the plan in the middle is now coming out of the page a lot more, and you can also go back through your layers and add more saturation or more depth if you want to your colors. So that is it. That's it for this lesson. We've basically worked on the landscape, and now we're going to do the last lesson where we're going to add a finishing title block.